My fiancé wanted an open relationship, then secretly booked a hotel with someone else, so I walked away. And what I did next left her life in pieces. I ghosted my fiancé after she asked for an open relationship before our marriage. I've rewritten this several times to shorten it, but our history goes back to when we were kids. I'm looking for advice on what to do when I get home in 2 days. I'm changing all names, obviously. I'm very sorry for the length of this monster. Jen and I had been friends since we were kids. Our parents were lifelong friends, so we grew up together and started dating in our teens. It was almost expected by our families. They had more plans for us than we did. When I was pursuing my master's degree, I had to move to another city, while Jen stayed in our hometown working on her nursing degree. After a year of long distance, we decided to remain friends to avoid the pressure of our relationship controlling us. We both stayed best friends and dated other people. It was weird because we both knew it was temporary, and we'd end up back together at some point. I graduated and stayed in the city where I got my master's, working in my field. I waited for a transfer back to my hometown, and when I got it, I was thrilled. Jen was in a long-term relationship with a nice guy, but I always felt he was wary of our friendship. I understood the vibe and stepped back out of respect. Though Jen and I would talk several times a year, my boss and mentor, Paul, a 44-year-old man, was a great guy, and we became good friends. He taught me the ropes. One day he came down from the ivory tower and wanted to talk. He explained there was an open position in a foreign city for 2 years, soon to be advertised. He described the position. I'd be based in Tokyo and travel occasionally to other Asian cities for a few days. The money wasn't huge, but all expenses, rent, hotel, and travel were covered. I thought about it, talked to my friends and parents, and Paul said it was a great opportunity to prove myself and climb the ladder. I figured, why not? I could save most of my salary and gain valuable experience. Paul said he'd speak to the boss and recommend me if I wanted it. He'd done something similar years ago, and it helped his career. So off I went. The first year was tough, adjusting to the culture and social rules, not only in Japan but also in the other countries I visited for work. One thing surprised me: how available women were everywhere I went. They loved foreigners. I got to sample the delights of the Orient. These weren't third-world women. Most were highly educated. I had many friends with benefits and clearly told them I wasn't interested in long-term relationships or marriage, as I was only staying temporarily. I ended up staying 2 more years. Paul visited several times a year for vacation or to supervise work, and I'll admit we had some wild times in places like Angeles City, Philippines, and others. When my contract ended, I returned home and put a nice down payment on a house just outside the city. After living in a city of 37 million, I needed space. I'd been home for a month when, while visiting my parents, I saw Jen. She and her boyfriend had broken up a year ago. We started talking more seriously, even though we'd always kept in contact over the years. We began dating again. I held off on sex despite wanting it, because I was afraid of what might happen. I'd developed an addiction to having various partners in Asia, and was trying to control that desire before getting serious with Jen. Everyone, including Jen, knew I dated, but on social media, there were occasional photos of me with different women. My mother called me a womanizer a few times, and truthfully, that stung. Now things started to fall apart. Jen and I slept together, and she was, for lack of a better word, surprised. She said I was different, not like before, meaning I'd gained a lot of experience, to put it nicely. She asked questions, and I admit I trickle-truthed her. I didn't tell her the exact number of partners because, even divided by 3, it was daunting. I had no doubt I could be faithful to her, but the seed I inadvertently planted that night would create serious issues later. Our families were thrilled we were together. It was always meant to be this way. We were doing great, and after speaking to her parents, I proposed. She moved in, and everything was wonderful. There were some red flags, like her asking if I was happy with her. Fast forward to December 2019, our wedding was planned for June 2020. We all know how 2020 went, don't we? Christmas was great, but close to New Year's, we had the first D-Day. I was working on the PC when Jen and her cousin Tammy, a 32-year-old woman, were looking through wedding stuff. I've known Tammy since we were kids, and we were cool. Jen asked if we could talk, and Tammy walked into the living room and sat on the sofa. I went to sit at the table with Jen. She started by saying, "Don't interrupt or freak out, I want to talk about something." She explained our differences in the bedroom, saying she believed I wouldn't be satisfied with her and would eventually cheat, ruining our future children and relationship. I thought, great, I'm about to get dumped. Just when I thought it couldn't get worse, I heard the infomercial guy in my head, but wait, there's more. Jen asked if I'd be willing to open the relationship so she could gain more experience and feel less insecure. She said I shouldn't worry because I was the only man she ever loved, which is why none of her relationships led to marriage. I agreed with her on that point, as I felt the same. I thought this was a joke, she couldn't be serious. Since this was a year and a half ago, I'll recall the main points as best I can. She said she'd only be with random people, never someone we know or work with. It wouldn't happen with the same person twice, and there'd be no emotional connection. I was like, what the heck? When I realized she wasn't joking, I lost my breath. I didn't think it was possible for a heart to skip a beat and jump to my throat. I'm not an angry or violent person, but I started yelling. I understood why Tammy stuck around. I yelled, "Tammy, did you put her up to this?" Tammy said she was just there to support Jen. Wow, thanks. Jen said I was free to do as I wished under the same rules. I said no. I was so angry. And even writing this now, I'm raging. I said, I don't want one-night stands. I want one person. She asked, who? I looked at Tammy, nodded, and said, I want to sleep with Tammy now. I got a rise out of Jen, and Tammy, not expecting that, turned red and looked uncomfortable. Jen said, no, she's family and someone we know. It's gross for you to suggest it. I was in bizarro world. Where did this come from? We argued back and forth, and I told her if she did this, the relationship was over. I was totally against it, loved her, and said we could work through anything together, but not this. I stormed off, grabbed my pillow, and went to the guest room. I could hear them downstairs for a bit, but couldn't make out what they said. It would have been a hilarious joke if it didn't last an hour. I didn't sleep all night and was a mess at work the next day. Jen started 2 weeks of night shifts that day, so we wouldn't be home together, giving us time to cool down and revisit later. Dinner was in the fridge every day with an I love you note, and she texted frequently, but I kept my answers short. Thursday night of the next week, I went to the PC to work on files and noticed an email notification on her account for a hotel reservation at a nice hotel near my office. I knew it well. I went there often with XIO workers. I thought she was supposed to be working, but might want to apologize and take me for a night out. The next morning, I waited for her text or call to invite me, but she only asked how my day was, saying she was happy she only had one more night shift. How did she have a hotel reservation? I was sick, stressing in my office, and started looking through dating sites, especially profiles without pictures, but found nothing. Paul popped in, asked if I wanted lunch, and saw I was a mess. I told him everything. He'd always supported my relationship with Jen. He suggested we go to the hotel restaurant for lunch. I screamed, no, not that place. He didn't know that part. We went for lunch, but I couldn't eat or drink. He said I couldn't work like this and could take as much leave as needed, paid or unpaid. I told him I couldn't stay at my house or see her. Part of me wanted to believe it wasn't true. I rushed home, packed as much as I could into my car, and went back to the office. Paul said, let's stake out the hotel and wait for her to check in. I'm no private investigator, more like Inspector Clouseau, but I had to know. We set up in the lounge bar, and I started drinking, hoping it wasn't real. Around 6:30, Paul tapped me, and there she was at the front desk, not in uniform. I wanted to strangle her, scream, spit, cry. I didn't know. We waited 10 minutes after she went up the elevator. Paul and I walked to the front desk, and I asked the receptionist to put me through to Jen's room. As soon as she answered, I yelled into the receiver, Jen, I told you if you did this, we'd be over. I'm done. Wedding off, relationship over. I hung up and got out of there. Now, where to go? I went to Paul's, and my phone lit up. The only person I called was my dad. I explained in PG-rated terms what happened and said I needed to leave town for a bit. It wasn't a discussion, and I feel bad for how I spoke to him. My phone didn't stop for 2 days, everyone called, and I didn't answer. I felt like I was walking underwater. Paul mentioned financial things to protect myself. House, wedding, car loans. We kept separate accounts, plus one for the wedding and one for house bills. I didn't care. The next day, I emailed Jen saying it would be our last contact, that I was leaving the city for a while, and the wedding and everything else were off. I called my dad back, spoke at length, and while he was crushed, he understood I needed time and space. He hoped we could work it out. 10 days later, I boarded a plane to Bali. I never answered her or anyone's messages or emails. I don't know if she left the hotel or stayed. I didn't care. I landed in Bali and climbed into a bottle for a month, going offline except for my dad and work. I didn't care if I got fired. I wish I could say I enjoyed myself, but I was mostly drunk, feeling rage, shame, and hate about how things went down. I kept in touch with Paul about my leave. After 3 weeks, he asked if I could return to Tokyo for work. We talked about the new global virus, and I mentioned returning to Canada to settle things, hearing rumors of lockdowns. I got to Tokyo on March 1st, and it felt good to work, even a little. After hearing about lockdowns, Paul suggested returning to Canada, but I said maybe in May. It'd only be 30 or 60 days. I needed time to plan. 30 to 60 days? I was in Japan for another year before getting vaccinated. By then, I didn't want to go home. My house was rented out, and I talked to family but refused info about Jen. In September 21, I learned my dad had a heart attack. He was doing well but needed a triple bypass. The surgery is serious, though not as bad as 40 years ago. I wanted to see him, just in case. I knew going home would be a mess, and I didn't want that. I just wanted to see my parents and thank Paul for all he'd done, despite my selfishness. But I knew I'd have to see Jen, and I had no idea how I'd feel or think. I'm sorry for the length. I left a lot out. Any advice, tips, or insults would be appreciated. I'm flying out in 4 hours and will land in about 24 hours. After landing, I went to see my dad. He looks good and is actually looking forward to his surgery. Mom is doing well but masking concern. I spent almost the first 24 hours by his side, talking about everything under the sun, but nothing heavy to avoid stressing him. I told him I'm here for him, but using this trip to reorganize my life, close some doors, and open new ones. Paul called, and we talked about my dad and work. He asked if I'd had contact with Jen, and I said no. He informed me the boss wanted to see me, but considering my dad, it could wait. I figured I'm in deep, so I might as well get it over with. I have a list of things to accomplish this month, and I may as well start. Meeting Jen is one of them. I entered the office for the first time in what felt like forever. Many faces were missing, a few new ones, and the usual suspects. A few people nodded and greeted me. We headed to the boss's office. I'd never been there before. He motioned for us to sit. I'd never spoken to him, though he walks the floor occasionally, and people part like Moses at the Red Sea. Here's the conversation that followed. The boss said, "Good morning, gentlemen. This is a closed meeting, and anything discussed is private." He went on a rant about responsibility and dedication, making good points, I admit. He looked at Paul and asked why they should keep me. Paul said, "He does great work, has saved accounts, and acquired many new ones. Plus, we can't find anyone to do the job for the 20% below market salary we're paying him." What the heck? Then Paul and the boss started laughing maniacally, like the bar scene in Goodfellas. The boss wiped a tear from his eye and told Paul that's why he's the best VP. "I make a good salary, but come on," I felt slighted. The boss leaned in and said, "Listen, kid, I know you had problems with your woman, so let me give you some advice." He quoted someone, and I may not remember word for word, but here's the gist. God gives a woman eyebrows, and she plucks them out and draws new ones. God gives her a face, and she paints a new one over it. God gives her breasts, and she buys a push-up water bra. God gives her a form, and, still not satisfied, she buys slim-fitting clothes to change it. If God himself cannot please her, then how can you, brother? Please don't kill yourself. That blew my mind. The boss looked at Paul and said, "I can trust you to handle this properly." He paused and added, "Your mother will kill me if I have to fire you." It hit me. They're related. Paul and I walked out, and I said, 20%, man, really? He put his arm around me and said, "Don't worry, I got you covered." I asked, "Am I getting fired or disciplined?" He said, "No, dumbass. You're getting promoted," kissing me on the side of the head. I said, "You could have told me beforehand, you jerk." He replied, "No, it was funnier this way. I missed you, kid. Now let's go get liquored up." I said, "It's 8:30 in the morning." He said, "Who does that?" "I do. You still have a lot to learn about enjoying life." This didn't surprise me from a guy who got drunk on sake and fought a monkey at a hot spring in Japan, and lost, I might add. We got drunk, talked about work, and what was next. We discussed Jen, and he advised me to meet her for closure. He said we both did stupid things but are good people. Once I get closure, I can move forward without an emotional anchor. He said we'd talk about my employment future after that. So, that's checked off. I still have a job. Dad's looking good, but Jen's still on my mind. I unblocked her on Facebook and scrolled to prepare myself. I sent a private message asking if we could meet for dinner soon. We exchanged pleasantries and are meeting in the next few days. Jen and I agreed to meet at a restaurant a few hours after she got off work. Going into this, I feared two things: that my anger would remain and I'd act accordingly, or my love for her would remain and I'd act accordingly. I hoped to find a comfortable middle ground. All my plans flew out the window when she walked through the door. She looked wonderful, smiled, and walked over. My stomach was in my throat. I wasn't this nervous when we lost our virginity together. We shared a short, awkward hug, and I smelled my favorite perfume on her. Was she about to love bomb me or play emotional tricks? Was she in another relationship to show me what I missed? No rings on her finger, not even the one I gave her. We talked about my dad first. She said she always checked on him when on shift and assured me the surgeon for his bypass was one of the best. We made small talk about her extreme workload during the pandemic and my experience in Tokyo's lockdown. I was ready to crack. I was calm on the outside but falling apart underneath. I told myself I needed this to consolidate my feelings to move on. We danced around the elephant in the room for a painful amount of time. Finally, she looked at me, her face changed and the conversation blurred. I'll recount it as best I can. Jen said, "First, I want to tell you how sorry I am for what happened and for hurting you." I replied, "Are you sorry you got caught or sorry for how you hurt me?" She said, "Of course I'm sorry for what it did to you, what it did to our lives and our future. I threw it away because of my insecurity." I asked, "Did you plan it because of your insecurity? Or did you secretly want to punish me for the people I was with when we weren't a couple?" She said, "Maybe both, but let me say that any other man in my life before we were engaged, I never loved like I loved you. Tim, her ex before me, cheated on me because he said he could never compete with my feelings for you. We broke up for that reason. I didn't know this, and honestly, I never felt bad he cheated." She continued, "I never wanted you to know I was going to sleep with another man. I thought I could emotionally detach, and even if you found out, we could work through it like everything before." I said, "You thought very wrong. It was probably the most painful thing I've ever experienced. I didn't need you to be perfect or experienced, I just needed you to be mine." She said, "Every single one could never add up to what I felt with you. But now I'm thinking, was it a real feeling? Or the projection of the dream our families wanted? Or the fantasy we expected?" It got emotional, and Jen excused herself to the washroom to collect herself. We were in a medium-sized restaurant with only a few occupied tables. Paul tagged along for support, as some suggested, and was in the sealed-off lounge. I looked for encouragement or a thumbs up, but he was in an animated conversation with two attractive women, laughing with hand gestures. He finally looked over, gave a questioning thumbs up, and I nodded that everything was okay. He smiled, gave me the middle finger with a smirk, and went back to his antics. "This guy, seriously." Jen returned, and we resumed. I asked, "Is there anything you want to ask about that night?" She said, "It can't be undone, it doesn't matter." I said, "Nothing happened. I wasn't even sure if I could have done it. When you called the room, it scared me, and I raced to the lobby, but you were gone." I said, "It doesn't matter now. I'm not here to rehash the past. I want us to work on moving forward." She asked, "Can you forgive me?" I said, "Of course I can forgive you, and I do. You're not a horrible person. You made a horrible series of choices that put us here. It's not all your fault. I should have been more open and understanding of your worries." I was cycling through emotions: love, anger, regret. Part of me wanted to yell, another to take her home and forget this happened. For weeks I'd watched Reddit videos on YouTube, preparing for this, seeing men punish themselves for worse betrayals. I was determined not to be that simp. I looked at her, the boss's words in my mind: painted face, painted nails, form-fitting dress. Did I know her? Was her mind the same? Were all women's minds the same? I hardened myself. Jen asked, "What now? Is there anything in the future for us?" I said, "Remember when we were kids, walking home from the park, and that vicious dog approached us? I got in front of you on instinct to protect you. The owner called the dog and it took off, just seconds. But at 9, that's scary. All these years I stood in front of you, loving and protecting you from whatever came. But this time, when I gave you everything, you stuck a knife in my back, like the frog and the scorpion." That hit her like a bolt. She lowered her head and sobbed. I wasn't finished. I needed to get it out. She said, "I'm sorry," and slid the ring box across the table. I left it there. I said, "I don't want this. I'm pissed off. You think I want to be here with my heart jumping out of my throat and you crying? I want to be home playing with the baby we'd have by now." I can't remember the next few minutes. She sobbed, holding her hands to her face. "I've said awful things, but that took the cake. I apologized, saying it went too far. It snapped me out of anger mode." The rest of the conversation calmed down, and after blowing off steam, we had a normal talk about life and the future. Because our parents are so close, her mom and dad are like my second family, and vice versa, we discussed coexisting as friends. Reconciliation isn't on the table. She got up to leave, and we hugged for a long time. "I'm leaving this here, and we'll finish tomorrow. It's been a long few days."